I am California of the past.
I
I
am
am California
California
of the
of the
past.
past.
I
I
am
am
California
California
of the
of the
past.
past.
I knew when we decided to scatter my dad's ashes from one of the highest mountains on the continent that visiting him and paying my respects would be a challenge. The hike to the top of Mono Pass, near Mount Whitney, in California's southern Sierra, is relatively short but very steep, and it starts at a high elevation. Some years, between the heat and the thinner air and me being woefully out of shape, I've thought that I'd never make it all the way to the top. But one year, on our semi-annual quest to visit his resting place, I wasn't worried about making it up. I was worried about making it back down. I usually make this hike with my uncle, who's more experienced with mountain areas than I am. He used to save people from crevasses on Mount Rainier, and he's generally pretty savvy about the outdoors. On the year in question, we also brought along my boyfriend. I was a little nervous about the walk because the weather had been wonky all summer. Freakish storms in California, and a couple of people getting hit by lightning, including in Long Beach. How do you get hit by lightning in Long Beach? But as we started the steep walk, everything was going perfectly. We didn't run out of water, and it wasn't too hot. A few gray clouds on the horizon seemed to be keeping everything at a nice, cool temperature. In fact, as we got up past the tree line, closer and closer to the top of the pass, it was getting downright cold. But even though I was wearing only a thin sweatshirt, I barely noticed. I was so exhausted, and so happy, and so moved to be at the top, gazing out over the mountain view that he loved, that I didn't mind the freezing cold wind that was starting to whip hail into my face. But as my uncle and I passed our celebratory flask of whiskey back and forth, we noticed that the dark clouds above us were getting lower and lower, and that the rumble of thunder was starting to roll just above our heads. And that's when I remembered all the people who had been hit by lightning that summer. And that's when I remembered all the burnt-out stubs of trees on the trail up, that marked the places where lightning had struck here, on our trail, near this spot. We all had the same thought at the same time. Squinting through the stinging hail, we leaped up and stuffed everything back into the backpacks. I could barely see where our path began among the sharp rocks and boulders littering the way back down to the trail, down the mountain to safety. But my uncle seemed to have a better idea where he was going. Beginning to trot, he called back over his shoulder, "If you start to feel the hairs on your arms tingle, get on the ground and curl up into a ball." And then he started to run. But I was drunk from the whiskey, and clumsy, and freezing, and kind of confused, and the thunder kept rumbling over my head, and I was sure I was going to get hit by lightning. I could barely see my uncle. He was so far down the trail already. But my boyfriend stayed closer, making sure I was still coming along as I stumbled my way through the rocks and down the mountain. My hands were going numb. I was shivering with cold and maybe fear. And by the time we got down below the storm again, I felt like I had been through a war. My uncle was waiting near the midpoint of the trail, and he laughed at me when I yelled that he'd left me behind, that he'd left a man down. And we all rehashed our close call and how vulnerable we'd felt there on the mountain. Farther down the path, everything was sunny and almost warm, and there was no hint of a storm raging up higher, unless you turned around to stare at the ominous clouds. More than anything, when I remember that one visit to Mono Pass, I think about how you have to respect nature and be prepared for any event, because your uncle will not save you. And I think about how happy my father would be that I learned that lesson.